Fear is not supposed to be in the form of an angry teacher telling you, you are doing something wrong or found guilty of something by the good guy in the mind, commonly set up by any type of indoctrination involving right and wrong, good and bad. The effect we have is that when people have fear, they believe that something is wrong, which causes even more fear, a double whammy. This topic of wrong was created to overwhelm our focus of perception, effectively making the observer seek something which is always possibly wrong in a world of good and bad, and the observer is sure to see bad when it already has been acknowledged as something which is unjustifiable and evil. Any negative we have in the world is so, simply because these constructs have their power metaphysically, where it is energized significantly. The advent of opposition also successfully makes people attempt to actively strive to be a good person. Whole lives are spent living together with unconscious negativity after successful spellcasting has worked its trick, simply because the curse of yin and yang effectively keeps the dark and the light from merging by keeping consciousness entrenched in a framework of limited scope. Due to this lure into a forced one-sidedness nature, one is rendered completely insane by a divided mind. The art of alchemy is to be one with everything in order to not resist it. It is the resistant magnetic energy called fear that allows two bodies of polar opposite nature orbit each other, which renders your experience in between two sides, one of which in where you are siding. The clash of the titans, clash of gods or dogs. Clash of doubts. Believe nothing. Belief has its core within doubt. There is just the no. The believe must not be mistaken for the no. The no is the no, and the believe has an eve, which means it is alpha to omega. Believe equals believe. The anagram for believe spells out eve bell, a time when the sun goes down, and a bell is rang to being an end to the day, everything quittends for the time to go back to sleep. When anything in the world of the matrix is dictating your being, this means you are believing yourself to something. You are forsaking your own divinity and five elements for that which is believed in. It is essential that you come up with your own belief. The way reality operates for you has to be owned, and it is controlled by you, by your belief regarding it. The observed and the observer are one. Doubt tempts one to believe momentarily in parallel realities of fear, which is what keeps one netted by the matrix. So many bees in the world have believed, that we've literally come to the point that, beliefs and thought forms have settled within a large part of collective consciousness. The question arises then, will we forever be in a digital holographic reality when intelligent programming can house within the center of consciousness? Ask yourself another vital question, do you ever have subjective thoughts and feelings about yourself when you are dreaming? Is that not just what is causing your dream on planet Earth to be dictated by subjective belief of your stance and role? Animals and nature have no correspondence with the world of information and thought processing. This renders them by default fully present in the now. This is where the zero-point potential of energy is found, where a human being also needs to be, to function optimally in the reality as an animal does from dawn to dusk. The sculpture. When there is a problem, one then evaluates self to see if there is something wrong in the behavior of the self or in any of the traits and characteristics that the individual embodies, in relation to data relating to what is in the category of wrong. During these phases, there is a lot of consideration involved over the feelings of others. There may also be a lot of diplomacy involved, taking into account different views and stances. This is how a mental courtroom is structured. One seeks something that has to be wrong, and once we find what is possibly wrong, we take ourselves to court and we put ourselves through trial, to come to a conclusion as to why it is we are not fitting into our own conception of reality, why it is that we are not harmonizing adequately with reality, and we judge ourselves through the reflection of a linear abstract framework, which is falsely programmed to be right, and we compare that to our actions, behaviors, and decisions, and we then attempt to pinpoint what is wrong or out of alignment. And so, the molding and processing starts from the conception of the word in the form of God's law, man's law, which does give rise to an eidolon programmed by the laws itself, which is used to pin the I, the soul, down with endless fear. Here is where the mind lures the user to start building this relationship between a teacher and a student, and the student has to mold in accordance to a demanding teacher set up in the consciousness as the one knowing what is right, knowing what is bad. The governmental position of the mind is set up through religious and educational programming. We end up believing that there is a lot wrong with us, and this further siphons out to the belief of unworthiness and lack, both of which has its source in the programmed belief in wrong and right, and gives rise to the belief that one is not complete and not ready, and one still has to go through a transition zone which most do not make it out of. The entire life becomes a transition zone of altering, molding that never seems to end and doesn't go anywhere, because the molding is in the face of a master or teacher that cannot possibly ever be impressed. An insanely embodied act of perfection is the game of the imposter higher self. When one lives life like this, you can be sure it would be a very passive and linear, boring, and especially suppressive life. As this teacher embodies perfection according to man-made conceptions, when one attains perfection in the eyes of a system, or society, that means that reality has actually changed you to what it wants. The matrix has you. When the macrocosm is allowed to dictate the microcosm, evil is the only result. Embrace the unconscious. Artificial intelligent phantasmagorias have arisen into physicality, sourced from the power of the word-created beliefs, and can and does successfully mold the perception of the observer to be opposed with the out-of-place unconscious aspect, brought about by false information in the first place. The unconscious dark aspect was used cleverly by dark occultists against us, to scare the masses of their very selves and keep them resisting fear, the poison, instead of embracing it and becoming one with it. A game of cat and mouse, where light and dark are well hidden from each other, the way the ego likes it. That is how you externalize subconscious aspects as living gods or eidolons, that which is perceived as unchangeable to which we are apparently lesser to. Please also note that any malefic negative observed phenomena is not seen and classed as such until filtered objectively via data which occurs in the mind. Something can only be something else when it is unaccounted for and separate. Using anything to hold onto, for comfort, is just another form of worship of a mental creation in the astral plane. Believing cuts you out of the whole. This is how your ether element is lost. We have been conned to make ourselves unaccounted for and separate by many beliefs worldwide, regarding that which can be obtained within the axiom of all for one and one for all. What is the one that all is for? It could be any one deception that you are all for. That is the spell of all for one. Sounds like democracy, a system employed to bring equality and a greater good to a greater number, yet removes freedom and free will of those bound to the concept. All is one, but if all is for one, then we have a fundamental disconnection between our spiritual nature and physical, as a cause and effect from the belief would influence wholeness. All of us are definitely not here for one objective, that would be a totalitarian communist regime. The problem is the original classification, which is interrupting your own vibration from within, that is the unconscious right, perceived as a negative in the external realm where it appears. As long as the negative can remain, so will the positive obstruction, the policeman. The negative is maintained by energy, mainly emotional or astral energy, which is applied to the analysis of the mind-centered consciousness, which in turn affects the emotional bodies, triggering by the use of buttons. In the time before the advent of good and bad and the mechanism of judgment automata, everything was simply embraced as self, unconditionally. In the now, there cannot be such a thing as a negative observing, simply because there is no negative or positive in the now. Any negative is what creates time, Time in which relativity plays you down in the past via the program of memory. Transcending time. When you are not lingering in mind or time, then what happens is what I call event consciousness. Only events occur and experiences in the now moment. There is no feeling of a passage of time or gap between events, because in the now you are one with the whole, which is rooted in the formless non-manifested, not bound to the time track, essentially not one with the pyramid management of digital worlds enslaving time-bound creatures. In the present moment, observing in itself is just an awareness, and that is it. Only the past tense observed can be classed, or labeled, using memory with the combination of emotional stickers attributed to the divisions between opposites, and this is how astral memory keeps one's perceptions in check vibrationally, in accordance to the fiber optic pathways of your mind. Like a good button and a bad button that can be pushed, we are all responsible for setting up our own buttons within, and it is obvious that the more beliefs you hold, the more buttons you create for the architect to push and make you affect via the body-mind connection. None of any of these manifestations we have in the human psyche would have been possible if there was no inception of knowledge waking one up to the apparent world of good and evil. Let's go down and confuse them. The observer is the observed, and still people out there struggle to understand what we call spellbound. This is what is known as the domino effect, as you need 2 dominoes first before you can start a chain. The second party is fear times 2, created by logical analyzing, and the third party is the mind, which is then energized and empowered to create law and order according to data, which is where consciousness is used to materialize the matrix. The fear is sourced from an unconscious right, as is construct, projecting from the subconscious mind, creating its own opposition, opposing yourself together with it in the underworld. The path to full consciousness is the alchemical release of man's laws and God's laws. You must literally completely forget of a world of opposites, especially when emotional energy and creative energy was used to uphold such worlds. The more you free such emotional attachments, the more emotions become available for the creation of that which you want to bring to earth.